Was that a yes? It started. Okay, and welcome to the Castle Morpeth Local Area Council Planning meeting. It's our first meeting since the elections under the new administration. So welcome to members who were here previously, but especially we've got two new members, Councillor Murphy and Councillor Darwin, I believe. Yes, make sure I've got that right. What I want to just mention first of all, before we actually get started, is just a reminder that we need to maintain social distancing at all times. And if you do need to leave your seat, please put your mask on. So if you're declaring interest, you need to leave the room at any point or anything else, please do put your mask back on. Okay, and just as you were aware, this meeting is being recorded as we can't allow public into the meetings yet except our public speakers. So let's get started. Our membership and terms of reference, it's in your agenda for you all to see. And that just lays out who our members of this committee are and the terms of reference of this committee. Is everyone happy with that? Thank you. And next, do we have any apologies for absence? I've got Councillor Scott Dickinson.
Everybody else is here, Chair.
Okay, everyone else here. That's fantastic. Thank you. And can we approve the minutes of the last Castle Morpeth Local Area Council, which was held on Monday, the 12th of April, 2021, which has already been circulated to everyone? And next, disclosure of members' interests. I will disclose an interest on item 6, which is 20/01768/FUL. That's on the basis that I am going to speak on behalf of the residents. Do we have any other declarations of interest, please? Okay, thank you. So on to the determination of planning applications. So for the benefit of our new members, a reminder for our former members, and just so that people who are watching the live feed understand the process of the planning applications. We will introduce the application in each instance, and then we will invite the planning officer to advise on any updates or changes to recommendations, and then they will present the report. We then have opportunities for public speaking. The objectors will have 5 minutes. If there's more than one objector, that 5 minutes will be split between the number of objectors. That will then be followed by the local councillor / parish councillor. And again, that 5 minutes would be split if there were more than one. Then that will be followed by the applicant and the supporter. Again, 5 minutes. If there's more than one, it would be split. There's no questions allowed to or by any of the public speakers. Then we will follow with members' questions to planning officers. We will then look for the debate. So we'll have a proposer. We'll have a seconder, and if that's seconded, we will then go to the debate. And then after that, we will go to the vote. Is everyone clear? In which case, we will move on to item 6, which is a change of use for vehicle depot to material recycling facility at Watson's Yard, Barrington Road, Bedlington. Application is 20/01768/FUL. And at the point where I give my presentation, I will then be leaving the room and handing over to Councillor Bainan to continue until that application has been decided.
Sorry,
Thank
Chair,
you.
can we just hand over to Councillor Bainan just for the avoidance of doubt, just for this full item, please?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
absolutely fine. Do you
Yeah,
want
if you
me
just-
to leave the
no,
room
you
and
can
come back?
Stay where you are for now.
Right,
Until
okay.
the public speaking. Thank
That's fine. Councillor Bainan.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, councillors. Welcome to the first LSE meeting of this administration. As Councillor Foster said, it's the change of usage at Watson Yard, Bedlington, Barrington Road, and I think Ryan, I think you're doing the presentation.
Yeah, thank you,
Please.
Chair. There are no updates to members following the presentation, sort of at the last Castle Morpeth area local council. Just moving on to the presentation. This is an application for the proposed change of use of a vehicle depot to a material recycling facility at Watson's Yard, Barrington Road, Bedlington. A decision on the application was deferred at the last Castle Morpeth local area council in April for a committee site visit to be undertaken. The site is located within an existing industrial estate. Existing units are located to the north and south and also west of the site, whilst residential properties are located to the east beyond the railway line. These were identified by the planning officer to members as part of the site visit last week. The proposed site plan shows the proposed layout of the site, whilst the site photograph on screen shows the existing unit viewed from the site entrance. And these photographs show the site from various viewpoints. A site walk around was undertaken by the officer and members during the visit to understand the site and its surroundings. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions from statutory consultees. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Chair, is it okay if I come in at this moment?
Certainly.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. During the new and existing member training sessions I ran on the planning system, we said that when we heard the first applications at each committee, that I just briefly go through and point out some of the issues I raised during the training course to help new members see how those principles and theories apply to an actual live application. So Ryan's introduced what the scheme is for, and the report sets out in detail the proposals, and then it goes through the consultee responses, then it goes through the steps we took to publicise this, and you'll see a list there of the number of neighbours notified and the number of objections we received. There is a summary of those objections there. You'll see them bulleted on page 15. Then we go through the various documents and planning strategies which are relevant to the scheme, and then from page 16 and onwards it goes through the appraisal of the scheme. During my training sessions with you, I place great emphasis on looking at what are the material planning considerations when we're looking at any scheme, and you'll see at the top of page 17 there are bulleted points there talking about the principle of development, that is whether this is an acceptable location or not for this type of development, the design and character, the impact on residential amenity and public health, issues of highway safety and the Environment Agency's role. And those broadly cover some of the issues that the objectors have raised as well, and some of those issues which came out in debate last time. When you're looking at these factors, as we enter the debate stage, there's clearly a question of should we be approving this or should we be refusing it, but also I would ask you to consider if you are on the fence over this one in terms of you see both sides of the argument, that perhaps we can discuss what additional conditions to attach to the permission that you think could address your concerns. Okay. The report then very clearly on paragraph 7.2 sets out the starting point here, and that planning applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan unless there are compelling reasons not to do so. Okay, and that's set out in paragraph 7.2. Given some of the debate last time about the impact of this development on nearby residential areas, I'd draw your attention particularly to paragraph 7.9, which mentions that the actual active recycling operations will be taking within buildings. And then in terms of understanding how the impacts have been looked at, paragraph 7.16 and 7.17 talks about the role of our public protection team, which in other authorities is called our environmental health team, who have looked at the likely impacts from noise and dust, etc. And it concludes that that is satisfactory. Then the report goes on to look at these various issues, and it comes to a conclusion that the application is approved subject to the recommended conditions. And then the recommended conditions are set out from page 21 onwards. This is a very standard approach to how a committee report is set out. And so if any of the new members particularly have any questions about how the conditions can work or may not be sufficient, then we can discuss that. So your job really then is to look at those material issues and to consider whether, in your opinion, the benefits of this scheme outweighs the harm. And clearly the harm is tangible issues to do with impact, but the benefits is to do with the economics of the scheme and the effects on sustainable waste management and the need for a comprehensive network of recycling facilities to avoid a landfilling waste material, which has consequential benefits for both economics and the climate change agenda. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Rob. That's very useful for all the councillors. Right, we will move on to the objectors. I have Paula Johnson and Julie Foster. Have you divided your times up, the 5 minutes?
No, I'm the elected member,
Of course you are.
so I've got a separate 5 minutes.
Yeah. I'm just looking around at... Thank you. And I'm also looking around to see who's doing the timing as well. Great, thank you. Paula Johnston, just...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it like a buzzer situation where I get buzzed out at
Yes.
5 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll time
Let's
you
be
on my
quick.
phone, so yeah, you should hear it.
Can you start like halfway in then? That'd be great.
Just start when you're ready, and the time
Okay.
will start when you start.
All right. Can I just start by saying, please just excuse me. I may seem a bit, just I've never done anything this before. And we are, as you can hopefully appreciate, we are very, very worked up about this. All the residents, we are just so upset about it. So I'll start. So I am here today on behalf of the residents from 3 separate parishes to object to the change of use for Watson's Yard. So this narrow piece of land on Barrington Road, so it's on Barrington Road, not Barrington Industrial Estate. This has historically been for commercial and storage use, and it should not be permitted to be altered to industrial use. So over the past 2 decades or more and more residential estates and single properties have been built around this area. And at the last meeting, it was really disappointing that when asked, the case officer, Mr. Salisbury, he did not know that there was actually a new built house just 50 metres away from this proposed site. And there's 3 new housing estates, Heritage Gardens, Willowbrook and the Willows. These are not part of the original settlement of Bedlington Station, which Mr. Salisbury stated. So with this in mind, the general lack of knowledge regarding the local area becomes really apparent. And we believe this gives grounds for his recommendation for this application to be challenged. Now, obviously, we are fully aware that this application, if it was to be declined at this stage, then Mr. Watson won a further appeal, then Northumberland County Council would be liable for the costs. But as elected officials, it is your duty to support the local communities and our residents. We need the support in this. Now, we were also really disappointed to learn that the site visit did not incorporate any view from the residential properties. No skips were operating during this visit, so you've had no opportunity to experience the level of noise currently emitting from Watson's Yard. So only last Thursday evening, on the 10th of June, I believe it was right before your visit, we were subjected to Mr. Watson moving wagons around after 6 o'clock, which contravenes the planning application. Although this was more than likely done just to hide the view from the site into where the properties are. Although we did feel the introduction of the Northumberland flag on this date was a nice touch, we would also like to question the suitability of the metal shed that's being used for the house, the machinery. So these buildings are notorious for having asbestos in, and we question whether it's suitable to put a large industrial machine inside this building and let it rotate around. Is that even warranted? We just don't know. So we're also sure you've had an opportunity to read the original objections and view the photos which were added at this point. Now, these images that we're sure you're aware, because I'm sure you've all read the objections, and seen the images, these show exactly how close these wagons and skips are to properties and what was currently stored in them. There was garden waste in them, there was rubble in them, and this is all before planning permission was even granted. We'd also like to address the issue of noise, which has been deemed reasonable by the LPA. The noise which is currently arising from the skips coming in and out of the yard, hooking and unhooking and tipping at times, is already causing distress to residents. We believe once the trommel is introduced, this will undoubtedly cause more noise and disturbance. And for anyone that doesn't know what a trommel is, it's like a giant washing machine drum. And what that will do is it will rotate for 30 minutes per hour for 10 hours a day, with all this rubble being tipped inside of it. So once this is rotating, there's also a front-loading machine going to be operation inside this building, inside a metal shed, rotating and causing noise. So whilst this is all going on, there's also machinery operating outside, front-loading shovels being operated, skips coming in and going, and this is 10 hours per day and 6 hours on a Saturday, providing Mr. Watson adheres to the timescales, but as we've already seen, he likes to operate outside those times, so we're not holding that much hope for it. So this amount of noise has not been measured or accounted for. I'm going to state a policy here. Policy GP23 states that planning will not be granted for development that cause significant harm to the quality and enjoyment of all aspects of the environment. We cannot stress enough how close this is to residential properties. Now, you're saying it's on 3 sides, but it's where the train line runs. You have houses surrounding the whole area. And these houses are being built, there's more, we've got more families. It's just not the right place to put a recycling facility. So we also recently saw a YouTube blog by your own head planner there, Mr. Morpeth, in which he emphasises how important outdoor space is to towns and communities, and how planning needs to change in order to give towns access to these areas and not force people out into their cars in order to seek out these environments. Now, this application is a prime example of where these changes need to be made for the better of the community. Just because areas such as this in the past have been allowed to become even more industrialised, does not mean it is right to continue to do so. With the introduction, as previously stated, of more housing and the likelihood of the train coming back to Bedlington, there are far more beneficial use for this.
It's 5 minutes, sorry.
Can I just really put in there as well? We've got 3 other recycling centres around within 2 miles of where we are. We don't need another one in Bedlington. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and you did very well.
Thank you.
Right, Councillor Foster. Could we set the time again, please?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I've been asked to speak against this change of use application by many local residents who fear there will be an adverse effect on their quality of life and health and well-being. At the last meeting, I spoke about how I represented a number of residents at a planning committee a few years ago where they were unhappy with noise and dust levels from another recycling site located close by on the Barrington Industrial Estate, despite living further from the site than these residents do from this application site on Barrington Road. The other recycling site had planning commissions to mitigate the dust and noise issues, but they were clearly not sufficient, as residents did continue to suffer noise and dust pollution. There are no guarantees that this site will be any different, even with the recommended planning conditions imposed. I was pleased this application was deferred for a site visit at the last planning committee. However, residents did contact me last week to advise that there were trailers being moved along the boundary of the planning site. And when we turned up to the site visit on Friday, I was disappointed to see that trailers had been parked nose to tail along that rear boundary, almost totally screening the residential properties from our view. There was a small gap through which I could see a property, and it was fairly close to the site, and that completely reinforces the residents' concerns regarding the proximity of this site to their homes. It was confirmed that there's asbestos in the application building, but members of the site visit were reassured that the asbestos materials would be stripped out and replaced. I urge committee members to request that a condition be imposed, requesting a scheme be submitted for building works should the application be approved. The application is detrimental to residential amenity. Residents' outdoor recreation time at their own homes could be affected due to the impact of the noise and dust pollution coming from the site. I mean, we registered a temperature of 26 degrees just this weekend in the car. So over these warmer months, there's going to be further noise and dust pollution for residents because they'll have their windows open to ventilate and to cool their homes. They're going to be outside in their gardens. The access point to the application building will most likely be open again so it doesn't overheat inside the building, but also to facilitate the aggregate material being taken in and out of the building. The cumulative effect of dust and noise from 2 recycling sites on the Barrington Industrial Estate and the Barrington Road will most certainly have the potential to affect the health and well-being of those who live in the area. Paragraph 7.15 of the report stated the closest residential property was approximately 50 metres from the site. The edge of the application site is actually only around 20 metres away from gardens of some of the properties, according to the As the Crow Flies measurement using Google Earth. In fact, one property is actually only just over 40 metres away from the boundary of the application site when I actually did those measurements. There's also a food establishment very close to the application site, Barrington's Breakfast, Brunch and Lunch, and excess dust would clearly be a concern where food is being prepared and served. There will be a clear intensification of activity at the application site, resulting in increased noise levels for 10 hours a day each weekday and 5 hours on a Saturday. And as some gardens are literally, as I said, just over 20 metres away, it's clear residents will be adversely affected if this application is granted. And whilst residents would welcome additional employment in the area, this application would create very few jobs at a big expense to residential amenity. There is also the question of the need of another recycling site so close to a much larger recycling operation. I understand the existing site on Barrington Industrial Estate is not currently running at full capacity at present, but it is reasonable to assume that they will wish to return to their pre-COVID activity levels as soon as they can do so. I urge you to listen to the valid concerns of these residents, the people who are going to be affected by this application, and to refuse permission for this change of use application. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Julie. Right. In support of this application, we have Katie Wood, who is going to speak on behalf of the applicant. Just when you're ready, the clock will start. Can you? Yep.
Is that on?
Yeah, you're on.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for listening to this statement. I hope that the site visit on Friday helped some of the members to appreciate the proposed development, and most importantly, that measures have been undertaken to ensure it doesn't impact on the residents in the surrounding area. It is fully appreciated that there are a number of residential properties in the surrounding area and to the rear of the site, and we have discussed the proposed operations in detail with your public protection officers. I would also stress at this point that the operations will require an Environment Agency permit, which will set out exactly how the site is operated, in order to ensure that it doesn't have an impact on the surrounding residential properties. And following the previous committee meeting, I forwarded details of what is likely to be in this environmental management plan, as well as details of the dust and noise management plan that would be incorporated in this. I would also just make one comment that the skip wagons are actually already stored as empty skip wagons at the site. Watsons of Bedlington has an existing operational yard that's on Barrington Road, but the skips are actually stored at this site and have been for a number of years. The waste that would come in the skips will be predominantly construction, demolition and excavation waste, and it will all be tipped and recycled in the building. I noted the concerns about the trommel and the asbestos in the building, but there's no actual proposals to alter the external appearance of the building, although I believe my client is intending to do that. All of the waste will be tipped into the building and recycled within the building, and any waste that isn't expected, so like asbestos and black bin bag waste that we discussed on Friday, will be isolated before it is taken to another appropriate facility. I'd also add at this point that he's proposing to put a concrete skin within the building in order to ensure that noise isn't an issue. The application site is located on an established industrial estate in Bedlington with 2 concrete batching plants close by. Local and national planning policies support this building's reuse as a material recycling facility. At the time, as I've already said, Kevin Watson operates a skip hire business from this yard. He currently takes any waste collected through to Ellington Road landfill, as there's no recycling at Ellington Road. So all of the waste goes to landfill. This is partly because Remondis is currently shut and he can't take the waste to that site. This, as you can perhaps imagine, is not in accordance with the waste hierarchy. It increases greenhouse gas emissions by increasing road haulage. What he simply wants to be able to do is to take the waste to his own site and recycle it. We're also very aware that there's other users on the site, such as the football factory, and for this reason, we're proposing to alter the access arrangements within the industrial estate to ensure that they have their own vehicular and pedestrian access. And in addition, we've looked carefully at the impact of the additional traffic on Barrington Road with transport consultants. It is appreciated that local residents have concerns in relation to the facility, and we have discussed this in detail with your public protection officers, and also will continue to do that with Environment Agency officers. The planning conditions and the EA permit will ensure that it is operated with no adverse impact. And actually, just thinking about it, one of the things that we discussed on site on Friday was the fact that the Environment Agency, if there is a complaint, their officers can come out, discuss what that complaint is, and actually change the permit to reflect anything that needs to be done to address those concerns. There are no objections from the statutory consultees, such as the Public Protection Officer and the Environment Agency, and your local plan would support this application. Therefore, we would hope that you would support the officer recommendation. And I would also stress that we would seek to work with the residents to make sure that this doesn't have an impact on them. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Right, councillors. Questions, please, to the officers. Again, as Councillor Foster said, if I don't see you, because it's quite difficult with the screens, just please shout out. Questions to officers? Looking around. Councillor Dodd.
Yeah, how long has the industrial estate been there? Just a simple question. Is it, what came first, the houses or the industrial estate?
I don't have a precise date for the setting up of the industrial estate, but it is a long-established industrial estate. And so, to be clear, I think the question you're alluding to here is this the type of use which is acceptable on industrial estates? And the answer, it is. And the follow-up question then is that while we understand the very real concerns of residents, is that given it is an established industrial estate and other industrial users could move onto it, what are the range of sort of noise and activity impacts you would anticipate from a generic industrial estate? And I would suggest, with all due respect, that you see the impacts identified in the report set against what other impacts arise from conventional industrial activities. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Rob. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, just a couple of questions of the planning officer, just for clarity, really, and they're important things. The conditions in this particular case are important to give us some comfort, and also for residents. So in particular, in relation to working hours, can you give us precisely what the working hour allowance is, and also in relation to dust and noise, precisely what is going to be conditioned on in relation to that?
Yeah, Councillor Jackson, if I can just step in sort of regarding the working hours. Condition 7 of the officer report states that the premises shall not operate outside the hours of Monday to Friday 8 AM to 6 PM and Saturdays 8 AM to 1 PM with no working on Sundays or bank holidays. In terms of the dust condition, there is a condition at number 10, which states that during the construction phase, no dust or debris caused by construction activity is permitted to be blown into the curtilage of a residential dwelling. An enforcement officer authorised by Northumberland County Council is the appropriate person to determine by their vision if dust or debris is being blown into the curtilage of a residential dwelling. And that condition was recommended by our public protection team. I also understand that dust will be controlled by the environmental permit as well. I'm not sure if public protection have anything further to add on that matter.
Yeah, just condition 16 as well is to do with the control of stock within the aggregate bays outside. So this is a standard condition that I would expect on a site such as this, and this represents what I would expect in terms of dust control.
And Chair, can I just nip in here as well? Also, there's other conditions on standard operational procedures about noise management and dust management at 14. There are noise limits giving actual top levels at condition 15 as well. Okay.
Thanks for that. Ryan, if I could ask you a couple of questions. I did notice the truck trailers that were parked conveniently along the boundary wall. Is anything in the recommendations that a boundary wall or fence could be put up? And I know on site visit the applicant stated that he was going to build a concrete skin inside the building to keep some of the noise down. Could that be put into the application as a condition?
Yeah,
Those two things.
Yeah, Chair, can I just come in at this point before the case officer comes in? And I'm picking up on one of the issues that Councillor Foster raised as local member, and she talked about, I think, the disturbance of structural asbestos due to vibrations, etc. All these issues, I think, could be covered by an additional condition if members were minded, requiring a full construction method statement for the building that would run and include any further amendments to it in terms of, removal of materials, and we could ask them for submission of a scheme showing how those steps to be taken. Ryan, you to come on to the issue of perimeter treatments.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so as part of the proposed site plan, there is a concrete boundary wall proposed along the northern boundary of the site. There isn't anything sort of indicated along the eastern boundary, which is where the railway line and the residential properties are located. But under permitted development rights, they could construct a boundary wall along there, or if you feel necessary, we could include that as a condition upon any sort of approval if members felt necessary. In terms of the alterations internally, those aren't covered by sort of planning, because internal alterations can be undertaken without the need for sort of planning permission. But again, that is indicated within sort of the submitted details that a concrete strip will be incorporated within the existing premises.
Tell me, please, where the trucks were, the trailers, was that the eastern side?
Yeah, that's correct. So where the trailers were, where we were viewing the site on Friday, that's the eastern boundary of the site. And there isn't any boundary treatments proposed on the site plan as part of the submission.
So just to confirm, we could make conditions that there was a boundary wall or fence put there where the trailers were, and that there will be a screen, a concrete screen built internally before the operation can proceed.
Yeah, absolutely. If we felt that that was necessary to mitigate the harm to existing residents, that is something that we could condition upon. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Ryan.
Chair, sorry to keep jumping in here. Before we move on to the rest of the questions, can I just add to that as well? A point was made by one of the residents, I think it was a good one, about the doors being open to the structure, that while operations will be continuing internally, in warm weather, those doors may be left open on the structure. I'm not talking about the people who live in the houses needing to leave their doors open, but we could include within the management condition about the need for doors to remain closed at all times, and that's a fairly standard condition to be attached to a waste management scheme. So, thank you.
Thanks again for that, Rob. I've got Councillor Dunn and Councillor Wearmouth and Councillor Towns. And Councillor Murphy as well. Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Whilst I would welcome any additional conditions that are put onto this application, my concern would be the monitoring of the conditions that are already there, particularly 7 and 10. I'm not going to name it, but I have one sort of business which operates in my ward, which constantly flouts the time limitations put on it, the operating times, and without much ever happening to it. So that would be a worry for me, and I'm sure it's a worry for the residents as well, because these conditions are only worth the paper they're written on if they're actually acted upon, if they're broken. And that's the same with the dust one, obviously.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Councillor Wearmouth.
Thank you.
All right, yeah, good.
Questions really for the officer or for Rob or the EHO regarding probably condition 14 and 15. So this is looking at the site must comply with standard operating procedures for noise and dust management. So obviously there's two existing or proposed documents there that are governing these things. Does that give the local planning authority and the EHO enough teeth? Obviously I appreciate that this is going to be governed in the operational phases by the Environment Agency, but I think that we would take a little bit of comfort that we've got some considerable level of our own teeth in that. And specifically just thinking of noise management and links with 15 as well. I mean, it's all very well having conditions that say that you must be 5 dBA from above background or no more than that for X number of metres away, blah, blah, blah. But you know, who's testing that? Who's monitoring it? Is there something, and forgive me for not being familiar with the detail on this bit, but are the Environment Agency going to check that on a sort of spot measurement basis every now and again? Or are we going to do it, or are we going to hope that it's fine and then we get a complaint and go back in and look at it afterwards? Thank you.
Okay. I'll let the Environmental Health Officer come in at this point, but if I can say, the use of conditions in this context is very much a belt and braces approach that we're approaching here, because normally national legislation always suggests that the planning permission should not seek to duplicate controls already in place through a different regime, in this case the environmental permitting one. Here, given the concerns of the residents, it was felt that that there were advantages to being really clear with the operator up front about the public expectations, the management of this site. Okay, we have to assume that conditions will work, and that has to be a starting point. In terms of planning, we carry out reactive enforcement. In other words, if we get complaints, then we go and check and we follow it up if necessary. The Environment Agency, because they control operational day-to-day activities, use a more proactive approach where they carry out both announced and unannounced visit on a regular basis, because the firm will pay an annual licensing fee, and for that they get various inspections and checks. So it is very much a two-pronged way of looking at this, in that we can look at sort of longer-term issues through the operation of the site, but the Environment Agency will be there on a day-to-day basis if there are problems. And what the Environment Agency do, without going into their role too much, is if a site causes problems and they have to keep going back again, they can classify the site as a high public interest site. Then they are subject to a much more regular series of unannounced spot checks. Okay. This is all standard. This is to give you comfort, I suppose, from what you're getting at, is that this is very much a standard approach from the Environment Agency to how they control waste management sites. Thanks. I'll let the Public Health Officer come in here if that's appropriate.
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Rob. What I'd just point out is that condition 15 that you've raised there, Councillor, is also linked to condition 18. So if the planning enforcement team were of the view that an unacceptable level of noise was coming from the site, then the applicant would be required to pay for a competent noise consultant to carry out a noise assessment. And then the levels as to what is acceptable and what isn't are also set out in the conditions. Condition 18 as well also sets out that if an unacceptable noise level is determined, then appropriate mitigation measures shall be agreed and also implemented. Those measures to be implemented in the timescale defined by the County Council as well.
Thank you for that. Have we any... Sorry, Councillor Murphy. Yeah.
Hi. Apologies in advance. I'm really not sure which of the officers my question is for, so I hope you can guide me. At the site visit on Friday, I did ask the question, and I didn't really get a clear answer as to what is the reality of this type of plant living currently within and close to residential communities. So within the officers' reports, we have a lot of guidance and enforcement which looks as though this could sit comfortably alongside a residential community, and clearly the residents' concerns are that it can't. However, we have examples within Northumberland of where these types of plants already exist. So I'm curious as to what level of enforcement is required once one of these plants gets going, how often the Environment Agency is pulled in to address neighbourhood concerns, and whether operators tend to be quite compliant, because this is all theory and it would be helpful for me to have an understanding of the reality of how they actually work. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, if it's okay, could I ask this question?
Great, Rob.
And that's an interesting question, actually, and there is an element of length of string on this one, because certain operators of waste management facilities run for many years without causing any problems. Like any business, be that a hot food takeaway or an industrial unit or whatever, you get some operators who require more regulatory attention. I don't think in itself that's a good way of prejudging compliance to any particular site. A different way of looking at this is saying that if in the advent of problems, do we have enough tools at our disposal by the virtue of the conditions and the controls of the Environment Agency to make sure that this site runs acceptably? And I think the answer to that is that this represents, in my experience, quite a heavy use of planning conditions on a site like this. And there's always the risk of moving into what you could call micromanagement of businesses on a day-to-day basis. But we do recognise the concerns of residents, so that's why this level of conditions has been advised. I'll keep drawing attention back finally again to, we are not talking about a new site with no possibility of other activities. Now, this is an established industrial site, so things other than waste management could take place on here. And as you'll be aware, many industrial activities, by their own virtue, can be noisy, disruptive, busy, and have extended opening hours. However, this gives the opportunity for a robust set of conditions to be applied. Thanks.
Thanks again for that, Rob. Right, I'm looking around. Any other questions from councillors to officers? I can't see any hands up. We need a proposal before we go to debate, please. Councillor Dodd.
I'll propose the officer recommendation, Chair.
Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, I'll just second that. Okay.
Thank you. We will move into debate. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. I recognise the deep concern that residents have over this, and if I lived there, I'd have exactly the same concerns, and I understand fully why they are feeling the way they are. But the truth is, if we just refuse this, there's no real planning grounds to refuse it, and it will get appealed. We wouldn't have as much say over conditions. I'm a bit unclear whether Councillor Dodd is proposing the conditions as read, because it was mentioned by officers that additional conditions may be put in, and can I ask him as the proposer and the seconder whether or not he wishes to add those to his proposal, or he just wants to go to a vote as written?
I'll take legal advice, but I'm quite happy that the additional proposal, the additional conditions are added if the planners and the solicitors say that is fine.
Normally what we'd do if members did eventually vote to support this, then the precise wordings of those conditions will be delegated to me to agree and run past the chair. But just for clarity, it appears to me that what we talked about was a construction detailed scheme, in other words, a works management plan for the construction phase, which could include removal of asbestos, etc. Perimeter treatment to an additional boundary, and the issue of the management plan, including that doors shall remain closed at all time while any recycling operations are taking place indoors. Was there anything else, Ryan? Okay.
Rob, does that, when you say about looking at the building, include the building of a concrete skin internally?
Yeah, what we'd ask for there is that while that would normally, all those works be permitted development issues not covered by planning, if we ask for a construction management scheme which will detail the various steps that can be pre-arranged with us, and then we can make sure that the proposed methodology of construction, we can consult public protection and make sure that the most appropriate proposed route of construction is being taken. Yep.
Thanks for that, Rob. Thanks. Have we any other councillors who wish to make comment? Councillor Wearmouth.
Thank you, Chair. I think, firstly, just to say thank you to the lady who's here on behalf of the local residents who spoke really well. I think you noted it yourself, but it isn't an easy thing to do when you come to these meetings. It is, for me, quite a challenging application, actually. If it had been a bit further into the industrial estate, it would have been an awful lot more easy to come to a conclusion. I'm a little bit concerned about the proximity. I think, though, that ultimately we would probably be defeated at an appeal if we were taken to an appeal and were reliant heavily on what I would say are a number of pretty strongly worded conditions. But unfortunately, the thing with conditions is always whether they're actually not only adhered to, but actually enforced. And I think we're all aware of development in our own wards or close to them where that doesn't necessarily happen. So all I would urge for the planning team and all the people connected to the planning team and so on is that those are not only, you know, observed but seen to be observed and checked and so on. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wearmouth. Got Councillor Towns.
Thank you, Chair. I'm probably just going to echo really what's already been said, a slightly different spin on it. I find this, again, I wouldn't say I'm particularly happy with this application. I don't, you know, we've got some measurements in about 50 metres and 75 metres. It's pretty obvious that the backs of these gardens are not 50 metres away. You know, we heard from Councillor Foster saying somewhere about 20 metres, and there's a number there, I think it's number 17 on West View. That's clearly not, well, more than 50 metres away. And I have some, as a local councillor, I have some experience of a similar situation in my division where just recently quite a large number of residential properties have been showered in a dust or soot, which is a bit like Xerox powder. It's sticky, it sticks to everything, it's stuck to windows, window frames, garden furniture, garden toys. Pets have come in with black feet, putting marks all over carpets in people's houses and on their kitchen floors. And you've got to wonder what people have been breathing in, actually, when you've got that level of kind of sticky stuff in the atmosphere. And that was from a tyre shredding operation. And I know that this doesn't include tyre shredding, but there are conditions that the environment agencies, the county council looking at the site in my division, that dust, that soot should not have been allowed to escape into the atmosphere, and yet it did. Now, I have to say the Environment Agency were actually pretty quick in coming out and having a look. They've given some recommendations to the site operator, who I would say is being fully cooperative with all of that, and is cooperating. And there's some further recommendations to deal with those issues going forward. But we can put as many conditions on as we like, but it doesn't stop the reality sometimes that A, they won't be adhered to, or B, sometimes these systems fail. These dust damping systems fail. So that's just a bit of recent experience that I've had. It's with a bit of a heavy heart that I say it, though, because unfortunately I think Councillor Bourne is right in that if we were to refuse this, this would be taken out of our hands, and this is an opportunity for us to put quite a lot of conditions on the planning application, which will, I hope, mitigate the kind of problems we've seen at other similar sites around the county. But I don't do it gladly. But I'm afraid I would have to support the application simply because I think ultimately it's the lesser of two evils. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Towns. I'm looking around. I can't see any other hands up. So we need to go to the vote. The proposal from Councillor Dodds, seconded by Councillor Jackson, was to agree the proposal, the recommendation, with the conditions in that have been stated, with which Mr Murphy and the Chair will go through to agree a set of words. Can we go to the vote, please? Those in favour? If you can keep your hand up, we're trying to count everyone. I always abstain when I'm chairing. Sorry? That's 9-4. Can we have hands up for against, please? I can't see any. And abstentions?
That's 2, Chair.
2. So that's 9-4, no against, and 2 abstentions. Right, thank you very much for that, ladies and gentlemen. Can we bring Councillor Foster back in, please?
Chair, for a meeting at 5, and I think the head meeting will take a lot longer than anticipated.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Baden. And if we can now move on to item 7, which is reference 20/03389/FUL. And that's a proposed residential development of 4 dwellings as amended on the 21st of December 2020 at land south of Centurion Way on Headon on the Wall. And I believe Richard Lawton is presenting on this one. Richard?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a quick update before I start. There was a late representation that was received last week on Thursday, and this was from 13 Centurion Way. There was no additional issues that were raised from the other previous objections, but in summary, the concerns relate to the height of the proposed development and that there's no justifiable need for any housing in Headon. So just a quick summary, but there was no real issues that were raised beforehand. So I'll quickly try and go through the presentation. The application is seeking planning permission for the proposed residential development of 4 dwellings at Centurion Way, Headon on the Wall, which is located in the defined settlement boundary of Headon. The site is an infill plot with residential property surrounding the site to the north, west and east. The land is a sloping embankment with elevated views of the valley looking towards the River Tyne to the south. The detached properties would be positioned in a linear formation with the access and frontage facing Centurion Way and the rear elevations facing south. The existing hedgerow will be retained on the northern and southern boundaries with the exception of gaining access into the site, and there will be a single garage for each property with on-site parking provided. And just to remind as well that there is permission for the construction of a large agricultural barn directly adjacent to the southern boundary of the application site under a prior approval application in 2020. The permission allows a large barn measuring 75 metres by 10 metres and up to a height of 9 metres. The removal of the permission for the barn is secured via Section 106 agreement between the applicant and the landowner and will be legally bound to any approval granted. The detached properties will comprise of 5 bedrooms and the design adapts to the sloping land ascending to the south from the street level with the appearance of a bungalow from Centurion Way and an additional floor below to the rear incorporating a modern glazed elevation. I've additionally included this site section plan. The proposed dwellings have a low single storey height of 4.5 metres from street level, which would be up to the middle of the first floor windows to the opposites of Centurion Way, but this has a separation distance of 75 metres. In relation to its surroundings, the development would be approximately 2.5 metres higher than the neighbouring dwellings to the west, but overall still lower than the remaining surrounding two-storey houses. The properties comprise of 5 bedrooms with garage space, and the car parking standards in Appendix D of the emerging local plan requires 3 parking spaces per dwelling and a minimum of 1 visitor parking space. It's quite hard to actually see on those plans, but what it's trying to demonstrate is how the vehicles can manoeuvre within the site. So the plans are showing the vehicle tracking for the garage and the driveway. So each plot provides a suitable space to manoeuvre, and the on-site parking areas comply with car parking standards. An additional parking visitor bay will also be provided on the existing highway verge that can be secured by a condition. The 3D visual provides a clear indication of how the development will look from Centurion Way and is set back from the roadside. This is taken from an elevated position, showing the buildings will be sympathetic in terms of their scale, design and use of buff brick. The same view shows development in context with the extant permission for the barn, which forms a material planning consideration in the overall planning balance. In this instance, should the current application for housing be refused, the barn can be built in close proximity to the proposed site, which will offer greater visual impacts and restricting views. The rear elevation is a more modern appearance with the use of glass walls and the use of buff brick and grey roof tiles and are consistent throughout. The proposal aims to provide an overall design that is sympathetic to local character of Centurion Way, but also not discouraging high quality design. These photos are taken from the northwest corner of the site on Centurion Way. It highlights the undeveloped nature of the site and views beyond. The scheme would obstruct current views to the south from Centurion Way, although the design has offset this impact with a single-storey height to appear less overbearing. The separation distance between proposed and existing primary elevations exceeds 20 metres, which then satisfies the requirements of the local plan in terms of privacy and loss of light. The photos were taken from Centurion Way looking south towards the site and the views of the valley beyond. As highlighted in the report, there is no right to a view, and this issue is therefore not a material planning consideration. Policy C3 and HWC2 of the local plan does restrict development beyond the application site in the area of high landscape value, which in this instance is the vast area lying south of the site. The Council's Northumberland Landscape Character Assessment identifies this land as glacial trough valley sides that consists of cluttered settlements and frequent developments of new housing. In terms of development guidelines, it refers the need to ensure that new development doesn't alter the character, scale or form of existing settlements, creates good settlement boundaries that don't result in development encroaching into the upper valley sides. The development is within the confines of the existing settlement boundaries, sits alongside existing built development on an infill plot, and has a southern edge that is softened by planting. The development would not encroach into the upper valley or alter the character of the existing settlement. The applicant has, since the last committee meeting, has submitted a density analysis of heading on the wall that states averages 29 dwellings per hectare, and the proposed development is 18 dwellings per hectare. It has to be noted that there is no distinctive character within the village. The residential area around Centurion Way has a mix of terraced housing blocks and larger semi-detached and detached dwellings with larger curtilage plots. The application site proposed scheme of 4 dwellings would therefore not be out of character with the mix of housing densities in this part of the village and be similar to some of those lower density parts of the village. The images also further highlight other existing properties on the southern boundary of Headon with large amount of glazing, unique styles and use of materials. The bottom plan in particular is a permission from 2018 to the southwest corner of the village, which comprises a modern design with balconies, cladding and walls of glazing. This demonstrates that the proposed development would not add a new incongruent feature in the village, as there is a mixture of visible development from long-range views from the south. There is also no national or local plan policy to suggest that the proposed development of 4 dwellings on the site would be regarded as overdevelopment of the site, and the design has considered the immediate street scene. The long-range view from the south shows the site and a section of the southern boundary of Centurion Way. The development site would be screened by the existing hedgerow, but also seen in context with other detached properties of varying styles. And from the same view, the photograph show further demonstrates the greater impact from the consented barn should it be constructed. So to conclude, the application is recommended for approval, given the scheme is an infill plot within a sustainable location. Whilst the development would restrict views of existing properties on Centurion Way, the dwellings have been designed to a single-storey height from the street level and to a sympathetic style. There will also be no impact to the landscape character or the existing build-up area. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. Rob, are you wanting to pop in now?
Yeah, again, just to follow the theme through, particularly for new members' perspective, this second application is for residential development, and you'll see a lot of these applications in your time on committee. But the format of the report follows the same approach as the last item. So you'll see that the report goes through a description of the scheme, it goes through the planning history, okay? And I'll draw attention there to an issue that in the past, different permissions has been approved on this site, ranging from a single dwelling up to a number of other residential properties. You are not measuring the acceptability of this scheme against other schemes, because potentially there could be a very large number of alternate ways of developing a site. What you're looking at is the merits of the proposal in front of you. The planning history is there really to emphasise that the principle of residential development on this site is long established. Okay? We then go through the consultee responses, and then we look at the number of neighbours notified and the number of objections. While no planning application should be regarded as a ballot, in other words, the residents are not voting on whether or not they support the application, I would advise members that the views of the local residents are consistent, and when we look at paragraph when we look at the bullet point on page 31, the list of concerns and the petition, I think it's fair for you to regard this as a good reflection of local opinion. So, with the proviso that it isn't a ballot to whether this goes ahead or not, I think it's fair to say that this is an accurate representation of local concerns. Okay. We then, and you'll all get used to me using the term, what are the material considerations here? And on the foot of page 32, you'll see under paragraph 7.1, you'll see the bulleted list of issues that are the most significant when looking at this application. We then go through the principle of development, which is on page 33. And what is worth emphasising here is unlike many small rural schemes you will see where the proposal falls outside a settlement or is in the open countryside, there is no dispute that this is actually a site that has always been anticipated to be developed for residential purposes, both in former and the current local plan, and has formed part of our estimations of likely land supply when we conducted the examination in public to the local plan. So what you need to really draw your attention to, I suggest, from that is then, is this scheme, given at the starting point that residential development is acceptable on this site, is this scheme the cause of such demonstrable harm that it warrants refusal? So just to be emphasised, another point is you'll see that that on page 36 is that, well, page 35 and 36, we look at the density, and this is a new section in the report to look at and respond to members' concerns from last time this was considered, to actually try and look objectively at whether or not this site represents cramming or overdevelopment. You'll see the conclusion there is that the evidence, by looking at it from a number of different perspectives, both in terms of local plan policy, assumptions about density and local densities, does not represent a demonstrably over-dense development here. In terms of material considerations, and this is one I do believe I mentioned particularly in the training courses at paragraph 7.25, just to emphasise that no individual from an existing property has the right to a view to be maintained. You know, that has to be a starting principle. However, I can say that what you can look at is, would there be an unacceptable visual impact in general? In other words, would the development be so incongruous in this setting that you regard it as unacceptable? So the rights of residents' view across the site in itself, remember there, at para 7.25, isn't material, but the issue of visual impact could be. Okay, and then the report for new members then goes on through the other issues, and before it moves on to a set of recommended conditions. The last application, again for new members, was very much an operational permission. In other words, we were granting the use of a site. This is what I call a consumptive permission. In other words, it's a grant for residential development, so the conditions are primarily focused on making sure the site is constructed in a way which follows the details that have been submitted and covers issues like the highway works and a construction method statement. Okay. There are conditions on there about operational activities, but those are, if you look at conditions 15 and 16, which are on page 45, they do, though, relate to the construction phase of the site, not to the ongoing use of the properties for residential uses. Okay? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. So now we'll move on to public speaking, and we have an objector, Lorraine. I apologise if I pronounce this wrong. Twizel or Twizzle? Okay, over to you. The timer will start as soon as you start speaking.
I live at number 15 Centurion Way, which is opposite the proposed developments. I'm a normal resident with no experience of having to deal with this type of thing. I've somehow ended up as the spokesperson on behalf of my fellow residents because I feel so passionately about this awful development and the effect it will have upon our lives. So do forgive my nervousness. Our village was planned to spill down the hillside in gentle terraces, carefully designed properties keeping roof lines one under another, affording residents wonderful views over the Tyne Valley. This could be achieved on this site, but the developers have chosen to ignore this option and have decided to build two-storey houses, which they attempt to disguise by saying they are single-storey from road height. Single-storey with a pitched roof, making it almost double the height. Previous planning permissions which were granted all contained roof height restrictions to 1 metre above road level. This was indeed the case with the most recent development, the villa. Why has this condition not been applied to this application, which will have a bigger impact on the whole of the community? Why are we less important? Because of this one factor, village residents will lose the precious open space feeling, which is a godsend to our community. It is not just the loss of view which is an issue here. The benches on either side of the development, which have become a destination point for many residents and walkers, were left by the Mining Institute for the people of Heddon to enjoy the view and are part of our cultural heritage. The local nursery bring children down to eat picnics here. A local resident and her disabled son get respite by watching the birds of prey circling. People come to sit here in times of trouble, to watch fireworks, to see the sunset, to gather at New Year's Eve. If the houses are constructed, they will totally take away the view and the feeling of openness away, to be replaced by tarmac drives and the view into the windows of the new residents, a situation that neither party would feel good about. There can be no doubt, even though the Highways Department have assented the plans, that a possible extra 16 vehicles coming and going around our street will have a detrimental effect on noise levels, pollution and road safety. The safety of our children who ride skateboards and scooters at breakneck speed down the bank towards the blind corner, who play ball games and Kirby in the road. The planners obviously don't live here and cannot have experienced the traffic problems we already have to endure. They see a road size on a map, They don't see the problems caused when large delivery vehicles have to reverse the length of the constricted bending road when they can't fit through. Our cars have already been damaged whilst parked by passing vehicles as the road is so narrow. At the site meeting on Friday, I was asked by one of the developers, would I prefer a one-storey, don't forget that pitched roof, house opposite me, or a massive barn, as if those were the only two options. The answer is simple, it would be a barn every time because the proximity of the proposed garage wall will be about 15 metres from my and my neighbour's window, and even less to our garden boundaries. Our light, our openness will go. It will feel as if our rural lifestyle has been changed to an urban one, with just bricks and mortars to look at instead of greenery. There really is no need for this type of development. 50,000 new homes are being built within a 6-mile radius of this site. Plenty of this type of housing already exists in the village and nearby Darras Hall. Any development here should be extraordinary, eco-friendly, low-greened roofs, and innovative self-sufficient green heating and water. We understand that others would like to share our beautiful environment and that the developers want to see a good return for their investment, but more consideration should be given to the design and its surroundings. The decision you are about to make will be life-changing for village residents now and for generations to come. Once built, it will never be the same. We sincerely implore you to refuse planning permission for this development.
Thank you very much. And we have a supporter, Joe Ridgen from Headley Planning Services Limited.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to support this application on behalf of the applicant, Hamilton Willis. And it's great to be back at in-person planning committees as well. Hamilton Willis are a locally based, small-scale, bespoke developer owned by 2 North East natives and employing North East staff. Existing and emerging policy supports infill development within existing settlements, and this proposal clearly meets this vision of delivering high-quality homes within settlement boundaries. Members have now had the opportunity to visit the site and gain an understanding of how the proposed homes will fit into the varied character of Heddon. Since the previous committee meeting, we have sought to address concerns raised. In relation to density, we've provided an assessment of average densities across Heddon on the wall to demonstrate that the proposed development is appropriate for this site and respects the special character of Heddon. This has been considered in detail in the report, and it is concluded that this is acceptable. We've also provided additional details in relation to the car parking arrangements, ensuring both existing residents and future residents have sufficient car parking space, including provision of an additional visitor parking space on Centurion Way. We've also confirmed through visualisations that when viewed from Centurion Way, the new homes will appear as traditional single-storey bungalows, and the proposed development utilises the slope of the site to create a modern 2-storey aspect to the south, which is entirely in keeping with the character of properties along the southern edge of Heddon, especially along Heddon Banks. At every stage, the applicants have worked with the case officer and addressed each point raised during consideration of the proposals. Any design changes asked of them by the council's officers have been made so that there is now comprehensive acceptance from all the council consultees. The proposal retains public amenity by maintaining views through the development, including from the existing public benches, which until recently have been limited by hedging, and by creating large separation between the plots to retain views across the site to the Tyne Valley. The applicant has also agreed with the relevant parties to ensure that the approved agricultural building on the southern boundary would not be built. This would be controlled by a Section 106 agreement signed by the owner of the land where the shed has consent. The approved agricultural building is 75 metres long by 9 metres high and is planned to run along almost the entire boundary of the site. It's a significant benefit to the impact on the appearance of the village if this shed was not constructed. To address local resident concerns about disruption during construction, The application includes a construction management plan which carefully considers the route of construction traffic to the site, which will predominantly come from the south through the field. This will be controlled by condition 8 that's proposed. The proposal is for 4 exceptionally designed homes in a highly sustainable location. The impacts on residents have been carefully considered and have been kept to an absolute minimum. Any concerns raised have been mitigated against by proposing innovative design which fits into the surrounding street scene and landscape. The proposal delivers much needed high quality housing without impacting on the green belt, in line with the aims of the NPPF, the emerging plan and local plan policies. The proposals perfectly align with the policy context of the site, including local plan policy C1 and H15 and emerging policies STP1 and QOP1, as has been demonstrated in the case officer's report and presentation. I'll just quickly pick up something that was mentioned by the planning officer and the lady sat next to me in terms of separation distance. The separation from the front of the house to the garages, I think is about 23 metres, but obviously you can ask the officer just to confirm that, because a number of distances were given there. As the proposal fully accords with all relevant planning policy, we respectfully request that members approve the application that's before them. I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now over to members' questions. So does anyone want to ask any questions? Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions of the detail, which are actually quite important. And I talked to the planning officer at the site meeting about the car parking issues, and I'm not quite sure how the developers have managed to fit in 4 car parking spaces for each property. Can you tell us what the detail of that is, please?
Yes, I'll just put up the site plan. That might be a bit of an indication of the parking. So you can see, I don't know if you can see that from where you're sitting, but you can sort of identify there the parking spaces in the dotted line. So they've got the 3 spaces with the internal garage, which counts as 4 spaces. And the plan that I did show earlier on, which I do admit is difficult to actually see on the screen, that is a sort of a tracking plan which shows how the cars and vehicles can manoeuvre within the site, and also the display that and the width of the access is enough for a sort of large vehicle. See, I'm not a highways officer, so I'm just going to give a quick sort of summary on this. But that is there's no objections from the highways team. They're happy that the parking standards are acceptable on the site itself. So in that sense, there's no reason to sort of provide an objection, any sort of highway safety risk that would be refusable or would uphold an appeal. So I do understand concerns from residents, and when I have been there, it has been relatively quiet, but I've not been there obviously later on during the evening when it may be a bit busier. But I am familiar with Heading and the issues raised with highways in terms of around that bend on Centurion Way. But as I say, in terms of highways comments, there's been no objections for us to say there would be a significant risk to highway safety.
Okay. Chair, can I just come in very quickly here for the benefit of new members? The reason why this is a particular issue on this application was when this application was looked at last time, some of the details, which is perfectly normal practice, were left for reserved matters, so that details of parkings were going to be agreed in due course. Given that members were particularly concerned about this issue, our highways team worked with the applicant to just double check that actually this was deliverable and to achieve modern parking standards. And that process, I understand, has been concluded to our satisfaction. But I could just bring in the highways officer who's present here just to talk us very quickly through what steps were taken. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, during the deferral period, we were provided with some large standard vehicle swap paths, showing that the vehicles can access the new driveways, access new garages, and access the highway in a forward gear. So that's those drawings that are on that screen there. Additionally, they've provided an additional visitor parking space on Centurion Way, just between the two accesses.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to that in the debate, I think. Then my other material question is about the wall height, and if you could get back to the slide with the plan showing the wall height. I'm not quite sure that it was properly to scale. That one there, yeah. You said on the site visit that the wall height would be in the middle of the upper story windows of the houses on Centurion Way. It doesn't look like it at all on that schematic.
Sorry, if you do draw a line from the ridge height of the proposed development, it comes below the eaves of that terrace opposite. So it would just, the actual window is very high up on that elevation, so it would be middle. I would say middle of the window first floor. And of course, the distance between is 25 metres from that primary elevation to the ridge height of the house.
I still think that plan is misleading, because it doesn't look as though that wall height is in the middle of the upper story windows of the Centurion Way houses.
I mean, I accept that it may have been easier to see if the line was drawn on the plan, but that is what that's my judgment on it. When I did do that line, it did come below the eaves height.
You've obviously got the roof height on top of that. The 4.5. You've got the 4.5 metres plus the roof ridge above that.
I mean, the eaves come to was it 2.3 metres? Just confirm that. So it's 2.3 metres to the eaves of the new dwellings, and it's 4.5 metres to the ridge height.
That's the ridge. That's the ridge height.
So
okay.
4.5 metres, is single story height from the street level.
Right.
I mean, in terms of the height, though, it's again, what would you refuse it on in terms of impact? If you can't take into consideration the views, would it be?
It's the impact of the character of the area, which I will talk about a bit later on.
Yeah.
The other aspect of the roof height is which properties you took the roof height from. Now, the neighbouring properties is called the Villa, which has been quite recently constructed, and they are bungalows, and they're significantly lower than this proposal.
Yeah. No, I do accept.
So, is there any particular reasoning why this has been recommended being significantly higher than it is directly neighbouring property?
The properties either side of the application site have the access to the side of the dwelling, so there's scope to actually have them lower into the land. But this access has to come from Centurion Way, therefore it's straight onto this. It's straight on some of the level of the street. So if they were to be lower,
they're all on about the same level in terms of the hill. But these properties are significantly higher than the neighbouring proper bungalows called the Villa.
I mean, I suppose I'll just go back to the point I raised in my report and the presentation I made, that it's, I suppose it's a judgment you can make on character. I don't disagree with that, but it's the character is that there's a mixed sort of character in terms of styles, heights. Yeah. I just think it may be, from our perspective, of course, it's a debate for councillors to make, but is the height enough to refuse when you've got so many different styles and heights around Hendon on the southern boundary? It would have been also useful on the site visit to try and show members. I was going to try and show people around the sort of the area to see what get a general feel of Hendon itself. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But
there was only two of us there. And one final question. I'd just like you to put your slide up that does actually purport to show the character of the area, the photograph of the various houses, because I think it does to an extent. Which that one there, yeah. You'll see the houses in Hedden are generally in terms of a terrace, because the hill is so steep that it's possible to build houses in a terrace system, so that each house does have the full benefit of the fantastic location that is, and they're not shielded by the house in front. But I know you can't own a view, but that's the character of the village, and I think that is shown in those photographs. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Does any other member have any questions? Councillor Murphy.
The officer who presented the report spoke about there being no kind of overriding style of property within the area, and that there's very much mixed kind of architecture and so on. However, I'm interested in what the local residents have said in their petition about the mining heritage and the cultural and village heritage, and I'm wondering how much consideration has been given to the style of the design, the type of design that's been encouraged for this site, simply because in no mining town or village I've ever been to has a 5-bedroom executive detached property being the default style that's available. And I'm just curious as to whether the history and the heritage and the culture of the area has been looked at all, as to how appropriate this style of design is. Thank you.
Chair, could I come in on this one? And that's a very interesting question, actually. It's a good one about what is the local character. Okay. Firstly, I would say, if you've seen lots and lots and lots of coal mining settlements, often they had a mixture of house types in there, because it's a real architectural feature of former pit villages, that there were smaller houses for the workers, slightly larger houses for the pit deputies, and then often detached or large houses, say, for the pit surgeon. So pit villages do tend to have a mixture of property types in there. Okay, I think that's a starting point. I would advise that when the people who are concerned with this application talk about mining heritage, they were talking about things like maintaining the view and the open space there, and the use of the bench to use as a viewpoint. What I'd advise members on this, and this is particularly hopefully benefit the new members, is don't stray into the evaluation and saying, is it okay to build houses on here or not? Because some of the points we've heard are aimed, I think, at saying that we shouldn't be allowing houses to be built on this site. Remember that there's both a strong policy support, both in former policy and current policy, and there's an assumption that sites like this will take place. And indeed, the local authority has made decisions in the past to grant plan permission for a range of house types here, and things like bungalows, aren't designs which fit readily into all settings. However, so what we can see is that there's been a range of things considered appropriate for this. So my point to you would be that the starting point, and this is the converse to many applications you'll hear, that the starting point is acceptable for residential. Okay. So we'll be talking about a number of points of detail here, and what you need to show yourself. It's almost a flip of a scheme that starts off as saying, well, the starting point is no, because it's out in the open countryside, but can you convince us this scheme is of such fantastic quality or delivers such local benefits, it should be approved. Here, we've got the starting point for the assumption that the scheme is acceptable, but are there things which demonstrate, such harm as to justify a refusal here? And you may consider that the design constitutes that. I would advise that, though, that in terms of the density issues and issues like that, is that we will be on a fairly sticky wicket in terms of refusing on that basis. But you can still conclude that the overall design isn't right for here. But I don't think, to finish, that we could point to any precise definition of saying that this is not something that you would see in a pit village in the 21st century. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. It's a question really for Mr. Murphy. I know we understand that residents don't have, in planning terms, residents don't have a right to a view. But how does that affect the community's rights I think you might have touched on it before, but I'd really like to be clear on this one. You know, we do understand, I mean, I'm quite familiar with Heading on the Wall and that particular area of it. You know, that area is used by the community. It's usual for the community to use that space, not just to be there, but for the view.
Yeah.
And the benches themselves show that it is a place where people go to sit and look across the valley. So it's more, not so much as the rights to a view, but the community amenity.
Yeah.
You know, how does that apply here?
And that's a good question. I think that gets to the heart of some of the concerns about this. And remember, though, I'll keep coming back to this issue, that the development of this site for residential use is not really a question, okay? So we need to assume that it is perfectly reasonable that this site will be developed for some form of residential use, okay? That's a starting point. In terms of the view issue, it is sometimes difficult to tease this out and separate it, okay? So a person in their property has no right to the maintenance of a view through another piece of land, okay? And you would be erring in terms of placing weight on that in terms of a material consideration, because that will be held, you know, that is not based on a lawful consideration. What is a separate issue, though, is would the development of the site be carried out in such a way that it would be incongruous or, you know, an unnatural feature in the landscape, such that it would represent a visual impact and cause harm? And to that, you need just, I think, perhaps to consider, you know, design, scale, massing, and relationship with other buildings. Yeah. While I never have any desire to fight things out at appeal, I would say that my advice to you would be to place more weight on those sort of issues, rather than in itself the issue that there's a fallback position being mooted of a barn taking place next door to it, and that will be lost. Remember that permitted development right, well, that agricultural prior approval building could or could not have taken place anyway, and from my perspective, it's slightly a stalking horse in terms of this debate. So my advice to you would be to focus on the merits of the scheme we are talking about, and whether that strays so far outside what you would expect. Because remember, I'll keep going back to this, and this is a useful way of looking at this, that don't allow yourself to stray into thinking about, well, we shouldn't be building houses on there anyway, because that question has been answered by policy and former decisions. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak? Okay, I can't see any hands, so we'll be moving on to the debate. So does anybody wish to put forward a proposal? If we look at the recommendation on page 42. The recommendation is that this application be granted permission subject to a section 106 and the following conditions, and the conditions are laid out there for you in your pack. So do we have any proposals? Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, I'd just like to propose that this application is refused. I do have some specific planning reasons for that. I don't know if you want me to go into them now or during the debate.
Probably best if you mention them now, and then we'll know if you've got a seconder based on those
that's
reasons.
fine. I think there are no one's disputing the fact that this is an infill site and that there should be building on it, but the building has to be appropriate to the community and the local setting. I think there has been a point made about the harm to the community amenity and the visual impact on the area. I personally think that it is slight overdevelopment on the site, although there have been some arguments put forward in the report to say that it's not. But the overdevelopment on the site really, in my view, and I think the community view, is largely down to access. and that access road along Centurion Way, for those who don't know it, is extremely crowded. It's normally restricted down to one lane only, and this development will only make those problems worse. Service vehicles and emergency vehicles have extreme difficulty on accessing this site. I think it is instructive that previous planning permissions did have a much lower roof height restriction on them, and if lower properties had been proposed and they're not here, then it would have been perfectly acceptable to everyone. The character of Heading on the Wall is one of terraces. There are hundreds of houses in that community, all built on a terrace, so that every house can have the full benefit, and the community can have the full benefit as a whole of that really special location. And it's generally is that harm to the character of the area and the community, and I don't think the design and character of these houses fits in with that at all, and that's why I'm recommending refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Do we have anyone to second that?
Chair, just to get the debate, I'll second that.
I was just going
Carry
to
on,
say
yes.
Councillor Jones there. She had her hand up.
Ladies
Sorry.
first.
Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you. I mean, to be honest, I'd really like to echo Councillor Jackson's comments, but in particular, I think the height of the buildings, there's should be for the length of time the benches are in, which basically says if you turn that round, you know, so it basically says that view has gone for residents going out for a walk and able to sit on the bench. So I think really an issue which concerns me. Parking isn't going to be easy there, and I think there's a fair chance that parking will actually take place on the road outside of the properties. So.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Okay, so now we open this up for debate. Would anybody like to contribute? Councillor Bainan.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've got several concerns on this development. The height, repeating what Councillor Jackson and Councillor Jones have said, there's bungalows beside it which do sort of seem to blend in, but the height of these new buildings, you know, won't build in, and I feel it's overdevelopment on such a small scale, a small site to try and squeeze 4 large 5-bedroomed developments in. And also the entrance on the site visit, we were there at I think about 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and we struggled to get parked there. It was single track all the way around. Add another 4 buildings with 3-4 cars apiece in the visitors that'll be coming. I think it is just overdevelopment, and the height of the properties and the access, and it's a dangerous bend if you're going to go into there from the main, from Centurion Way. So I'm surprised Highways haven't had any objections on that, but it's the height and the overdevelopment.
Thank you, Councillor Bainan. Do we have any other member who would like to contribute to the debate? Yes, Councillor Dunn.
Yes, thank you. I'm just listening to Councillor Bainan's concerns there, and particularly the highways issues. So I'm just particularly concerned as to why highways had no objections when everybody else seems to be really concerned about it. I'm worried that we don't have this backed up by our highways department if we were to refuse this, is where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn. Would Highways like to put an...
Can I come in on this?
Yep, certainly, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. This is a common issue that people are concerned about the highways impact. I need to take you to the primary piece of government guidance on planning, which is the National Planning Policy Framework. and it says there absolutely unambiguously, is that we should only refuse schemes on highways grounds if there is a demonstrable severe impact. Okay? And the fact that the highways have looked at this at length and judged it against other schemes, I think, is the important part here. And we've used out the relevant standards. And I'll go back to the issue again, though. We cannot really be saying that we agree with the principle of development if we were saying it's not acceptable in highways terms, because a range of a range of densities could take place on this. And the evidence from highways is that a refusal on highways grounds wouldn't be justifiable because it doesn't meet that test of a severe highway impact. And that's been set out in numerous cases over the years. And one of the issues I think I remember I drew upon on the training course is that from a highways perspective, because of the change to primary guidance on this, is that it is very rarely a definitive no. It's a scheme needs to be adjusted to meet various parking requirements, etc. So, and this is a very good example of that, where there isn't the reason to refuse on highway grounds, but the scheme's been modified to meet highway concerns. Okay. I would say that, as an observation, again for new members primarily here, that out of all the many thousands of applications we deal with each year, that where there are public oppositions, where there's public opposition, it is a default position almost to object on highways grounds. So we need to keep our powder dry and only refuse applications we know we can substantiate on highways ground at appeal. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. Sarah Jane, would you like to contribute anything from highways?
Just really to echo what Rob said, the development itself provides the parking, the access arrangements, pedestrian facilities that are required for development of that scale. So by contributing those bits to the scheme, they've satisfied all of the highways requirements.
Thank you very much. Would any other member like to contribute? It's Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I'm in great sympathy with my colleagues who have objecting to this scheme, I think we have to accept that there is simply no substantial planning grounds to refuse this as it is. I think it's been said by the planning officer that the height issue is not sufficient in of itself to refuse it. We've got very clear steer from Rob that there's simply not a highways issue that is defensible, and that is the position we're in, where if we refuse it without being able to justify it, then we're in a position of being unable to defend it at appeal and losing costs. I think that's the reality in this situation. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Bainan.
Thanks, Chair. Just to go back on Councillor Bourne's point and clarification, please. Is height not a issue that you can object to?
Yeah. Through the chair, yeah. Can I make it clear here? My advice to you is strongly that a refusal based on highways grounds would be very difficult to defend at appeal. If you felt that the design of the scheme was the wrong for the character of the area, and the design is a combination of materials, so scale, massing, height, relation to the buildings, that is within your abilities to say, actually, you do not think this scheme fits. However, my advice is that it will be a relatively difficult decision to defend at appeal, not a wholly impossible one, but that the highways suggested refusal would be almost impossible to defend at appeal. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, just for clarification, I wasn't stating the highways issue as a grounds for appeal, because I've come across this situation lots of times before, where, and the highways issues are difficult. But I think there is a considerable loss of community amenity here, and the design and character of these houses doesn't fit within the current terraced character of Heading on the Wall.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Darwin.
I'd just like to echo the point as well that I do think this new development could be more in keeping with the properties to the east of it, the villa, and it is within our remit. I do believe that we can decline this and ask them to come back with the height is an issue. It's in keeping with the surroundings, and to lower the actual overall height of the buildings proposed. We do know that it will be built on, but I think we have an opportunity here to make sure that it's built in keeping with the area. So I do think that there is grounds to decline that on and maybe reduce the height of those buildings if we can.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yes, could I just, as seconder, just agree with the changes that Councillor Jackson's, or the clarification that Councillor Jackson's just made.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Chair, can I come in here just to clarify? There's been a lot of reasons mentioned around harm to amenity over development. Can we just kind of try and narrow those issues down for a reason, Rob, if that's possible, just to tidy that up?
Yeah,
So I think we're heading kind of in that direction now.
Through the chair, can I just table something that it is the case that there are nearby buildings that are bungalows, but it is the case that there are also nearby buildings which are two-storey buildings. So we will need to articulate very carefully a reason based around that. On this particular site, the relationship of these buildings with existing properties is out of character. Just one piece of advice further, if you don't mind me saying this, where we normally do have a character which is very well designed and articulated, then we would look to protect that via various means. Here, both in terms of doing the local plan and offering any pre-application advice on this site and previous schemes, there is no single character we could point to actually as being the defining character. However, you are still able to say that it is not in keeping. Again, though, I would just advise members that reasons for refusal can be weak or stronger. But what you'd be doing here, and to go back to my training again, is that you would be placing increased weight on the issue of the height being out of character with the adjacent units and that's effect on the wider place. Yeah, I don't think I'll have more there, but again, just so I'm being being ambiguous here, that this would be a relatively difficult decision to sustain its appeal. However, we are hearing a clear message from members. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anyone else got anything they'd like to contribute for? Return to Councillor Jackson to get the wording correct. No? Okay, Councillor Jackson, can you just repeat your recommendation with your planning reasons for the refusal, please?
Yeah, well, I do recommend refusal of this application for the reason of its impact on the local area and the local community. I think the design and character of the application doesn't fit within the street scene of Heading on the Wall generally. I don't know if you want to articulate that in planning speak.
Yeah, there is a line in the there is a line in the National Planning Policy Framework which suggests that schemes should be in keeping with the character of an area, and we would, if that was the reason for refusal, we will probably flesh that out into a reason based on citation of primary guidance, and I would run that past the chair.
Yeah, no, that's fine, and I quite accept that all of the other reasons wouldn't be defensible at appeal. So overdevelopment, for example, or the highways issue. Yeah. But for councillors generally, they're sort of contributing issues that make us look more carefully at this particular application.
So just to clarify there, Councillor Jackson, so you're happy for the Director of Planning to flesh out that word and in agreements with the Chair?
Yes, that's
Thank you. And is that seconded, Councillor Jones? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll move to a vote, members. Can you remember to keep your hand up probably a little bit longer than usual at the moment, just so that we can count accurately as to how people are voting. So those in favour of Councillor Jackson's recommendation for refusal, please raise your hands.
Six, Chair.
I would agree. All those who are against Councillor Jackson's refusal?
It's 4, Chair, unless you're voting.
I agree with 4, yeah. Any abstentions? Okay, no abstentions. On that basis, the application has been refused. Thank you. Okay, members, we'll move on to agenda item 8, the appeals update, and that's for members' information, just reporting the progress of planning appeals. Does anybody have anything they want to raise on those? No, that's fine. And then on to item 9, a petition with regards to planning enforcement in Linemouth. I'm going to hand over to Rob for this one. Thank you.
Do we have a public speaker on this? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, we do,
Okay.
Chair.
Okay. I'll talk this through to begin with then, before we invite the public speaker in. Okay. This report's come to the committee at the request of one of the members, and we often talk about enforcement in this county, and it normally cuts 50-50, and today we've heard a lot of on the 150% side of this where we are encouraged to take enforcement action both proactively and reactively. And this is an example of one of the pressures that we're under, where the primary legislation that we work from says unambiguously that as a local planning authority, we have to investigate every alleged breach. We can be taken to the Ombudsman if we don't. We don't have to take action because the action can either be resolved beforehand by either understanding, say, that something has been there for more than 4 years or 10 years for an operational change of use. A scheme can be changed, or the person who's alleged to have caused the breach can make an application which we can approve. At the end of that process, if we can't resolve it, then we will go down the route of legal action. This is a highly unusual case, because bearing in mind the proviso I start off with that we have to investigate complaints received. We had a scenario where one person made 25, I think it is, complaints about separate properties in an area, about structures in the front of gardens, which unambiguously do require planning permission, and so we investigated it. The first step we did then was to go out and check whether those structures were actually there, and then we wrote out to all the people to follow this up. If we go to page 63, under circumstances of the case, you can see that out of the total number of complaints we looked into, 72, that 34 were closed because we had evidence given to us that the structure had been there for more than 4 years and were now lawful. In 20 cases, we fairly quickly concluded that there was no harm being caused by the breach, so we decided not to pursue it. That doesn't mean to say that they have been granted planning permission. It's that we are not going to take action against them. For one case, the resident did put an application which was approved, and for the 9 remaining cases, there were 9 cases where we didn't consider that the structures actually did constitute formal development, and the what's left, we will be running through the expediency tests, whether to take action or not. It is highly likely, given the scale of development, that those probably will be deemed to be not causing harm and not expedient to pursue, but we need to let our system follow this through. Yeah. What it exposes is the fact that the local authority is in a awkward position here, because we have to pursue it, and I have received complaints directed against me and the organisation, which have gone to the local government ombudsman, where we have taken this approach and said no action is needed or granted planning permission. The problem we're facing here, and this isn't just down to Northumberland, and you may have seen in the press elsewhere in the country, during lockdown there's been a very significant increase in the number of complaints we received. And in fact, in some parts of the country, there's been lots of complaints made about people's neighbours putting up bike stores in the fronts of gardens in the south of England. We are completely sensitive to the stress this has caused us to residents, and we've tried to approach this in a very understanding way, and take the decision not to take action on all the cases. And I would rather us be using our resources to pursue cases that where real harm is identified. For example, we can talk about the staff resources to monitor waste sites that we talked about earlier on a more proactive way, for example. There was a very good High Court case came out at the back end of last year, which said, in effect, notwithstanding the fact that sometimes complaints are submitted about development which turns out to be unauthorised, it is, and it should be, within the local authorities' remit to make the decision that it has better things to be doing with its time than acting, and I'll use the quote, acting as proxies in neighbour disputes. Okay, so March is the way forward of this, and I've put this in the work plan of agreed step for this year, which has been through to Cabinet, is that we will review our local enforcement strategy to make it very clear that when we receive a complaint about a neighbour, that we will ask for the person who made the complaint to unambiguously state what harm is being caused by the alleged breach. Sometimes it will be very obvious what that will be, but some of the cases we are drawn into, we have to run through this process before coming to the final conclusion in this case here. In terms of the overall efficient use of our resources, I consider that a public-facing statement of how we're going to approach enforcement on these minor matters is well due for a refresh, because fundamentally we are running the same system as we ran prior to the local government organisation. So the conclusion is that we accept the petition, members look at the steps we have taken with these precise cases, and that all members will be consulted upon about a draft replacement for the local enforcement strategy, and that will be circulated to members before it goes to public consultation. Okay, that won't get us off the hook completely in terms of arguments that we are either over or under enforcing, but I do believe we'll be setting our stall out more clearly when we're talking about domestic issues like this, because as the petition says, particularly at the time of economic stress that we're in, a local authority has better things to be spending its resources on. Okay, but I will need to be very clear. So the last point is that the Ombudsman do look into cases, and they take investigation steps where we don't take action like this. So I think that sets it out very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we go on any questions, I'm going to just draw your attention to the recommendations in that we aren't looking to actually make a decision as such, but we do have a public speaker. And that's because we're looking to we're dealing with this under the petitions policy, where the lead petitioner has the right to speak. So before I bring any member in for question, I'm going to bring the public speaker in, and then we can ask questions after she's spoken. So Susan Nicholson, over to you.
Hello. I appreciate your opening statements, and I do understand that you are doing what you need to be doing. But I have written down a little bit that I would like to read for you, if that's okay. So thank you for inviting me to speak today on behalf of the residents of Lymouth, and again, thank you for your opening comments. Firstly, after doing research regarding what is classed as the front elevation, I wish to state, and I quote, "The elevation which faces onto your private garden, which is usually screened by fencing or walls, etc., is classed as the rear elevation. Therefore, lots of people's shades and other resident shades are in the rear gardens and not the front." You will probably disagree with that. These gardens have always been classed as the back gardens, as it's where the miners, as it is a mining village, grew their vegetables to eat, just like in an allotment. Often entering the local leak shores, many of these people had shades and greenhouses in their gardens. My husband, who was a bricklayer working in the building trade, asked 3 different building inspectors about planning permission for sheds. They all said they had never heard of such a thing, nor had they ever been asked to check out a shed for planning permission. In fact, they laughed at the idea. The council has caused a lot of stress and worry in the village because of the planning permission letters sent to some residents, but not all residents, which did not even state which structure they were referring to. This has affected the mental and physical well-being of many residents, plus extra worry regarding paying for this planning permission. As the council has a duty of care to residents, we are asking that the council puts its people before the generalised legislation. We understand that they have to follow up on any complaints made and visit locations, but surely people must always be the priority. With regard to the 4-year rule, I am totally confused by this. What is the difference between a shed which is new and a shed that is over 4 years old? Apart from the fact that the newer shed will probably look better, be in better condition and be more structurally sound. This is a clear case of discrimination based on a number. All this anxiety has been caused by 2 inconsiderate individuals out of the 1,858 residents of Limehouse, as stated in the 2011 census. You contacted 72 households by letter, and after further consideration, only 8 cases remain unresolved, which are awaiting an expediency test. Why were 20 of the cases expedient to pursue? Why were 11 closed, no further action taken? And of course, the other 32 had stood for over 4 years. You use the word expediency quite a lot in your report, so I looked up the meaning of the word. It actually means, and I quote again, the quality of being convenient and practical despite being improper or immoral. So the 8 unresolved cases are, in your words, awaiting a convenient, practical, yet improper and immoral test. In law, it means, and I quote again, an action that helps you deal with a problem quickly and efficiently, but which may not be fair or honest. So again, in your words, you are taking action to solve a problem, even though it's probably unfair or dishonest. That confuses me quite a bit. So is it expedient to cause this much harm and stress to a village community who are already suffering, along with the entire world, in the grip of a tremendously worrying and deadly pandemic? On closing, I would like to add that I was born in Limehouse, next door to where I actually live. I was brought up in Limehouse and schooled there until the age of 11. The village has always been a lovely place to live, even though after the council disposing of its council houses to the likes of Bernicia, etc., and private landlords renting out homes in the village, it has gone downhill a little. But I, like many others, still love the village and will continue to protect our way of life in Limehouse. Please end this inconsiderate vendetta, because that's what it feels like to the residents of our little mining village. We love our gardens, our little space that gives us pleasure, a place to relax and nurture nature and wildlife. It's our private space. Our garden shades are essential for storage and gardening tools. A garden is a stress reliever and a place to unwind after a hard day at work, and we are mostly working class people or retired couples with our families and loved ones living around us. All we want in our village is a quiet, peaceful life. So we ask the council to please show consideration and understanding and end this unnecessary action forthwith. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob, would you like to come in for that one?
Thanks. Thanks for your comments. I think they were very well made. Can I just talk on expediency is actually a precise term used in the planning system. And what that's actually saying is lots of things can be breaches of planning control, ranging from the most minor to the most significant. And an expediency test is saying that even if technically it requires planning permission, it is not expedient for us to do so and to take action, because the harm that's being caused doesn't justify, the stress, the cost, and the cost to the public sector to do so. There is no expediency test, though, in deciding whether or not to investigate, and that's the bane of the situation. Indeed, much of my working life is that we are drawn in to investigate matters which are often neighbour disputes, and if we just ignored them, then people will go to the local government ombudsman, and we would be, hauled over the coals for not following, the legislation. I would say, and I think you actually touched on the issue key here to why it isn't expedient in this case to take action, because the front elevation of a property is that normally the one facing the highway, and you are required to make a planning application to put a garage in your front garden or put up structures there like extensions. What that misses is that in the abstract, that sounds sensible because it's visible from a wider area, but actually lots of properties have longer front gardens than back gardens. So part of the expediency test we will use is actually if the front garden is large and used effectively as a back garden, then it's not expedient to take action there. So just to reinforce it, the final 2 points is that yes, unfortunately, lots of building regulations officers and indeed builders and indeed suppliers of house extensions, garden sheds, anything will tell you, oh, it doesn't need planning permission. You need to actually ask us or look on the web to find out what actually needs planning permission. Though we will, though, in this case, and I think this was come out clear on this, is that the expediency test here has shown that even though we had to investigate, and we took a light touch on that, including in terms of the follow-ups, that when we've done the expediency testing, we are not taking action on the bulk of these. Finally, I remember I wrote down you're at the 4-year point. And this is, again, to do that harm balance issue. The reason why there's a 4-year rule is that it's automatically assumed if it's been up for more than 4 years, it's not causing harm because somebody would have complained before then. So it's not trying to discriminate against new or old ones. It's saying that actually don't even bother getting to your expediency test stage. If it's been up for 4 years, it's immune from planning action anyway. And again, that's a national primary legislation issue. I don't think we're actually disagreeing on many of the points you're making, and I share some of your concerns, and I'm hoping that a much more pragmatic, to throw another term in there, approach to enforcement is needed, because we are seeing, a year-on-year increase in complaints, and it hasn't helped matters, because part of the thing you talk about stress of lockdown is that during the stress of lockdown, we've seen a lot more neighbours fall out with each other, and we shouldn't be getting involved in that if there's a sensible way forward. But I'd like to thank you for your comments, and the petition, I think, raised some important issues, and it does give us more ammunition, if you will, for following this through in terms of reviewing how we set out our stall in terms of enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. So we move on to any questions from members. Councillor Dunn.
Sorry, mine isn't so much a question as just a statement as being the ward member for Linemouth. And as the ward member for Linemouth, I can certainly confirm that this issue raised a real sense of turmoil and anger amongst residents, not just those directly affected by the possible enforcement measures, but amongst the wider village population as a whole. The majority of whom, I've got to say, just regarded this as simply a money-making issue, that money-making thing that the council was undertaking, and played out against the backdrop of the coronavirus and lockdown, and that, just made it worse. So this petition, I think, could have had far more signatures than the 149 that was submitted. But in response to the petition, this report has set out to clarify the position which the council was obliged to take, although I doubt that residents will ever be convinced that it was a light touch approach, But I would urge officers now to ensure that the remaining 8 cases which are awaiting a formal expediency test are dealt with as quickly as possible, just in order to conclude this issue. And I do welcome the planned review of the local enforcement strategy and look forward to a more coordinated and consistent approach to enforcement, which takes local priorities into account. So all in all, I think this petition has really done us all quite a few favours.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, just some broader comments really. I absolutely support everything the member for Linemouth said. I think it mustn't be forgotten, and Mr. Murphin will well know that the councillors are all very concerned about the enforcement process and making sure that it's robust and properly applied whenever there's a real issue. And so I really do welcome a review, and we always do. I think there has been a gradual increase in the resourcing of enforcement over the years, and we probably, if there's reason and to do that, and it sounds like there is, we'd all support even further beefing up of the enforcement process if it's necessary. But to have a review is the first step, and I'm sure we all fully support that.
Thank you. Councillor Towns.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't really going to speak on this, but I think I will, just to make a few points. Obviously, I've been aware of what's been going on just through local press and social media and things like that. And I think actually this comes down, to my mind, to being perhaps a lack of information being provided by the council. Because I think if what seems to have given worry to residents here, and in many cases, is the correspondence they've received. It hasn't given them enough information, and it's made them instantly worry, and it's made them think it's all about grabbing planning fees and everything, when it clearly isn't. The council, as Rob has pointed out, the council has a duty to look into these complaints. It has a duty to contact people. It has a duty to enforce planning law and everything else. And the ordinary layperson, the ordinary resident out there, is not a planning expert. You know, we're councillors and we're sitting on planning committees, and we're not planning experts. We've all just had some further training, and we have officers to give advice to us. And so for us to expect, for the council to expect ordinary residents, when they receive a letter out of the blue, to understand something about council tax or something about planning or something about a highways issue, I often find the correspondence we send out confuses me, never mind recipients of it. And if they were provided with enough information in the first place, I think they would take a lot of the stress and worry out of these types of situations when people receive this type of correspondence. I had a resident in my area contact me recently when he'd had a planning enforcement letter about change of use on a tiny piece of land that, you know, it's part of a housing estate. It technically still belongs to the developer, I would imagine. Nobody's looking after it, so he's started looking after it, and somebody had complained. And I had to explain to him, you know, we have a duty to investigate those complaints, because we can't just make an immediate judgment and just roll our eyes and say, oh, that's a pointless waste of time. We have to look into these things. And the outcome on that was it wasn't expedient to take matters further. It was not causing any harm. That's a good outcome, but it involved having to get me involved. It involved having to get a planning expert involved to assist this person, who thankfully did this work for nothing. And this is a pensioner on a fixed income who had received a letter, and their initial response was to be very worried about it. So I do think we need to look at, and I'm pleased to hear from Rob that this is starting that bigger conversation about these things. I think we need to look at how we communicate with residents so that we're not immediately putting them on the back foot and getting people's backs up, thinking that this is some sinister ploy or big government interfering in their lives, when actually what it really is just trying to be fair and balanced. Thank you.
Chair, is it okay to come in on the, just add a bit more clarity on that issue? So it's a very interesting example you've picked up there, because yes, I can see that minor changes of use of small parcels of land can be regarded as, you know, an insignificant detail. But I have a formal complaint on my desk, speaking figuratively at the moment, from the neighbours of someone else in another part of the county who has extended their garden into a small patch of ancient woodland and cut the trees down. And those people are incensed that we are not jumping down and taking them to the High Court, you know, the first day we became aware of it. And this is the real regular pattern, you know. This is why I use the 50-50 rule. I think it's fair to say that my inbox is covered by people banging the table saying we should be taking more enforcement action more aggressively, and, quote, making an example of people, taking a zero tolerance to breaches. The example was given to me by a member was that if they drove at 35 miles an hour or 38 miles an hour in 30, they'd expect, you know, to get a ticket. what all this really underlines, I think you're right in terms of the communication issue as well, because I've been looking over the last few weeks on how the local government ombudsman looks at this, and what they actually do is they set it all out in terms of all the statute and in terms of what they will investigate and what they won't. But what they've got, which I like the look of, is that they've got a number of worked examples laid out very much in terms of a narrative saying, here's an example, here's an example of one we won't take any action on. And they say, like, Mr. Brown did this, and for this reason, we didn't take action. I think some really plain English, clearly worked out examples to explain this could be useful for people coming to this for the first time, because planning is complex, and I think in my training course you've got a slight window into that. Isn't that normally for most people they will only come into contact with planning when they make an application themselves, which private individuals do very rarely, or they become aware of either a neighbour doing something or a neighbour accuses them of doing something. So I think you are right that a communications exercise on this will be helpful. And it is worth emphasising, not to understate the importance of, particularly when talking about various building works being carried out, both to businesses and to residents, that often a building contractor will misinform an individual as to the requirements for building control, for planning, for planning permission requirements. And what we don't want to do is persecute people who are innocent, apart from just making a mistake of not knowing what was required. But I'm fully aware that some members get letters from people saying, I'm being victimised, and I know full well that person has said, you ain't going to do anything about it, and stuck two fingers up to people, and is causing problems for their neighbours, then moves into a situation of saying, I didn't know anything about this, and I'm completely innocent. So what all this is getting at is that we need to take a really objective view on this. And I think the line math is one way, we did investigate, but actually, in the end, no action will be taken. It's just that in this case, it would probably have been better if we could have said up front that prove to us what harm is being caused to the complainant, and then we will make the decision whether or not to go down the track even. Yeah, and I would rather have the resources to investigate in, as I said, the waste management sites and the scrap dealers who do cause problems. That's no pejorative comment about scrap dealers, by the way, if we're being streamed. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wearmouth.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Robert. A lot of what I'm going to say has been said. You've fallen victim to a couple of quirks, really, I think, of the planning law in terms of what's permitted development and so on. These properties, I know, having delivered a lot of leaflets to them over the years, and especially over the last few months, trying to work out what the back is and what the front is no mean feat. And as well, because the principal elevation is actually almost on the rear of the property. But if you wanted to go by the letter of the law, if you determine that that's not the principal elevation, well, you could put a huge extension on the front, and then everybody really would be screaming at you, and rightly so. So I think this comes down a little bit to two things, maybe first, or three things. Firstly, getting to that first point, what harm was being caused. Secondly, could we have done a little bit more research before we sent a letter out and said, well, actually, there is no harm being caused here. We've got these handful of specific ones where we might want to have some communication with, just to get them on a completely firm footing so they're protected against what might be considered or not a nuisance complaint by a neighbour. And then thirdly, the way that we communicate things is probably, as Councillor Towns has said, is maybe in a bit of, I don't want to call it officer speak, what can I call it? Formal speak, because we maybe feel that we need to be formal when in fact we can be a little bit more informative. And that would be my comments.
And can I just, with the chairs, I think there's a time and a place for technical precision in how you use language. Just one quick thing, Richard. Yeah, there's an issue of pragmatically how you deal with these, because part of the investigation, even though that sounds a really heavy-handed word, into does it need planning permission or not, is finding up if it's been more than 4 years. It doesn't need it. With hindsight, well, we won't go down this route again once we've got the enforcement strategy changed, but it could have opened up with, if this has been up for more than 4 years, don't worry about anything. But that's sort of implicit in like the legislation. So sometimes, because we churn out lots of letters every year, and we're often involved in many hundreds of investigations at any one time. We do send out template letters. Points well made by everybody today, and this is something I can take away. Try and factor into this refresh, because it isn't just about changing the strategy, it's about changing how we approach it and the systems that go with it. And I'll bring something back to you all that hopefully will address all the concerns that are being made. Thank you.
Okay, does any other member have any questions or comments to add? No? Okay, so on that basis, then, if I can take you to the recommendations on page 21, and if no one has any objection, just take all 3 recommendations on block. Is everyone happy with that? Okay, so do we agree those 3 recommendations? I think that looks unanimous. That's fantastic. Thank you. And agenda item even, number 10, urgent business. I haven't been notified of any by anyone, and I have none. So on that basis, I would like to thank you all for attending. Can I just remind you all, before you leave, just to pop your face masks back on before you actually get up out of your seat. Were you wanting to add anything, Rob? Oh, it was just to put those on. And can we cut the live feed now, please?